Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream today. Let me bring George up with me. Goodness. George, glad to have you here and glad to have everyone with us for the session today. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Ben. I've been very excited about this process, and I'm delighted that you've opened up the doors of your data world to me and research world, and blessed me and held my hand through the process. I'm excited about everything that we found and discovered, and be able to share with everyone of our on our networks. So I'm excited, man. It's good, and we got some good speakers as well.
Yes, we have some amazing content for all of you today. As usual, we have some amazing speakers. George and I are both going to share towards the end today some of the brand new research. That's the whole purpose today, is to share some of the new research that we've been working on behind the scenes over here at Lighthouse around performance, culture, engagement, all those things, how they fit together, what the current trends are, what the workforce needs from us. So there's some really incredible findings in that we're going to be sharing today. And again, we'll hear from some leaders around those things about how they're helping to solve those problems, some great stories, case studies, all that good stuff. So let's do the quick housekeeping before we dive into some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So really quickly, if you are new to our live streams, we are givers or bribers, depending on how you look at it. It's okay with us either way. we love to reward people for staying connected, for being engaged, for being a participant in this. We don't want you to just be a spectator. Share your thoughts. If something works for you, tell everyone else. If you're having a challenge with something, feel free to share that. People here in the community, in the audience, love connecting with and supporting and serving each other. It's one of the things we've seen for years now, and it's a big focus here. We do giveaways at the end of every event to celebrate that and to thank you for participating. So stay tuned, stay connected, stay engaged, and there'll be good stuff at the end. 2 HRCI and SHRM credits pre-approved for this event. So we'll be sharing those credits out as always after the event. Sometimes those emails get eaten by the spam monster, spam filters, all those things. It's okay. Just ping us. We'll get you set up with that code after the fact if you don't get it from us within the next 24 hours. And then last but not least, sometimes LinkedIn does its little wonky thing. It hangs up. It'll restart you in the middle of a session or something. Don't worry. We're still streaming. We're still going. It's just LinkedIn hanging up. If you refresh, that's usually all it takes. If it keeps hanging up for you, you can jump over to the YouTube or the Facebook links, and we'll make sure, George, if you can post those into the chat for everyone, we'll get those out. So if you have to grab those will be saved there, ready to go. You can still be in the chat. We can still see you engaging. So you'll still get credit for the giveaways later on. All right. And as always, our events are supported by some amazing companies. We'll be hearing from Quantum Workplace, Confirm, and the team over at HiBob today as well. We'll be hearing from some of their leaders in the session. So this is going to be great. We appreciate them for coming alongside us, helping to make this event possible, and also for committing to supporting employers when it comes to performance and culture and pay transparency and how that fits into all these other things. There's some good stuff happening there, and we're excited to talk about it in the session today. All right. Here is what you can expect. George and I'll open up today. Quick welcome. We're going to hear from Shane McFeely. George got to interview him around gathering and really acting on the things that our employees need from us. Great session there. You'll learn a lot from Shane. Get to hear George share some insights there as well. Next up, I interview Sarah Reynolds from HiBob. We talk about the intersection of retention and pay transparency and performance and all those things, how they fit together. It's kind of a fun conversation to add into this today. And then last but not least, we'll talk with Josh Merrell from Confirm. Brilliant thinker around how we can use performance to really bring out the best in people, not just to punish them, not just to rank and score them, because they'll share some research with you on that. That's pretty compelling, pretty eye-opening. And then last but not least, I'm going to hand the reins over to George. This is the first time he's had a chance to be behind the scenes on a full research project. He's been diving in. He's been having a blast, finding things to share. And so he'll share some of the big things that spoke to him in the research. And then he'll let me do a little bit of mine, because I cannot resist talking about some of the things that really hit me in the data. It's going to be fun, and we'll wrap up from there. So it's going to be a great day, great session. Hang with us. You're going to enjoy this. George, before I pass this over, get started with the session from Shane, what do you hope the audience takes away from the day when they go back to work? What are you hoping is a big takeaway or two for them?
Yeah, I think as we talk about performance, we talk about the engagement and the culture and how that it really impacts each other and the connection of that. And so for me, the takeaway would be I hope people are encouraged, but I hope people are also challenged to really make some of the changes. And as they observe some of this research, to really be able to reflect and have that impact both as leaders and employees as well. Because, we got a lot of HR leaders and managers and directors in the chat already. And I'm thinking they need love too. They need that same, they are ultimately an employee as well. So finding that balance, be encouraged, but also take it as a challenge to really be able to adapt or maybe add some things that are shared today within those sessions as well.
Excellent. I love it. Call to action. There's some encouragement for all of you, and we're spot on the time. So we're going to go ahead and dive into this first section with Shane McFeely from Quantum Workplace. Let's hear what Shane has to say about listening to our people, understanding what they need from us, and creating better employee relationships. Here we go.
To our first session here today. I'm excited about this as we kick off this peace report. And I got a special guest with us here today. I'm excited about the conversation we've already been having, but now you get to join us here today. Shane McFeely, thank you so much for joining us. Share a little bit about who you are and what you're doing in your company and organization.
Yeah, thank you, George. Again, my name is Shane McFeely. I'm an organizational psychologist, and I'm the lead researcher at Quantum Workplace. And at Quantum Workplace, we really try to create a platform for employee success. So we look at all this stuff as it relates to performance, as it relates to engagement, as it relates to culture. And so everything that you're going to see in this report is something that Quantum Workplace has been researching about and talking with our customers about for many years now. So really excited to talk through this report with you today, George, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So let's dive into this, if we will, because there's a lot of things that we are both talking about that I believe the audience is going to enjoy as well. And one of those key parts of this piece, and we talk about performance, engagement, culture, enablement, and we talk about these things. And one of the most important things that we kind of talked about in the beginning stages is what is it to build a functional and supportive culture. And for instance, we talk about those who feel that their culture is dysfunctional, right? We talk about those people. And fewer than 1/3 say that they feel accepted, they feel respected and appreciated. That dysfunction where there's just a lack of belonging, they're there, but they're not there. And just another 36% say that they fully understand their job responsibilities and performance expectations. So when we talk about dysfunctional workplaces, we're saying there's a lot of things that it involves, a lot of things that it also affects. Can you talk a little bit about that, if you will?
Absolutely. So, I think it's first really good to start with some definition. So when we talk about organizational culture, we're really talking about how we do things. That's how do we make decisions in this organization? How do we talk about performance? How do we reward and recognize high performers? And really, how do we communicate and how do we make those kinds of decisions that happen with that organization? So I always like to start there. One of the things that I think that we're finding, not only through this research, but from previous research at Quantum Workplace, is how much performance management has such a big part to play when it comes to culture. So performance management, often we think of maybe annual performance reviews or something like that. But really, when we're talking about a modern approach to performance management, we're thinking through continuous conversations. We're thinking about having an opportunity to learn and grow in your position, being recognized and rewarded in a way that you want to be recognized and rewarded. And so I think what's really interesting throughout this report is you see this golden thread that's happening when it relates to performance and when it relates to how I do my job and how I can do my best. And so one of the things that I think is key when we're talking about being really intentional with performance is that employees are really looking towards leadership to really kind of lead that culture and really shape and create what that culture is. And so one of the challenges I think here is in getting leadership buy-in on what that culture should be and what steps do they need to take to kind of actively shape it. And I think one of the other challenges is that culture is going to continuously evolve over your organization's lifespan. So as business conditions changes, as the cast of leadership changes, some folks are coming in, some are leaving, they all have that impact and that contribution towards what we say our culture is. And so when we think about real world implications to kind of creating this culture, starting with your approach to performance, starting with recognition, making sure that you have a culture of recognition where everyone feels that the things that I'm doing are not only what I'm doing best at and what I'm good at, but also what's helping us win. So there's this whole idea of success and doing what I do best. And so when I have a culture of employee success, you really see that leaders are bought in. You see that managers are creating that team environment that's not only aimed at high performance, but also aimed toward psychological safety and being able to have good discussions and feedback about how is my performance, here's where I think my career is going to go, and some of that kind of stuff. And I think one of the things that's important when we talk about culture right now, I feel like it's kind of a buzzword, George, and we're hearing a lot about culture, and people really, a lot of organizational leaders, I think, concerned a little bit that they may not have a strong organizational culture or a positive one, or like you said, it may not be supportive, it may feel like it's dysfunctional. And so they're kind of saying, okay, I want to attract top talent. And right now, I think the labor market's showing that we definitely need to be in an attract and recruit mode and trying to get top talent into my organization. But I think that they're trying to say, how can I create this attractive culture by being true to our values, our mission, and some of those kinds of things? I think what's cool about this report is just how much that it shows that culture is not only impacted by performance, but it also impacts things like engagement and retention. And so much of this, like the stat that you started this conversation with, that idea of belonging and feeling of respect. When we looked at a big research study about employee retention, one of the top reasons that people felt like they left their organization is because they weren't being recognized and they weren't being appreciated for their contribution. So taken together, I think all of that is really showing what a functional culture should look like.
Yeah, you said so much just in the intro that I really want to just kind of dive into with that, and we'll get there. Let's break this down a little bit. Some of the challenges, and we may have some people in the audience today that are watching this and listening to you as you're talking, saying everything that Shane is saying right now, I can relate to. But what are some of those challenges that companies will face, or when it comes to implementing some of these findings, right? The research is there. We'll share a lot of this research and make it accessible. But when you looked at some of those research, how can they be mitigated? And how can companies really say, all right, this is what the data and research is saying to us. And I hear Shane saying all these things that are good, and how do we gel this together and really make it work in our workplace?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important because the barriers to culture are there. I think it takes time. It takes, like I said, leadership buy-in. There's a lot of leaders who might be resistant to change and need a little bit of convincing that this is the way forward to move the organization forward. I also think that there's also some misnomers about like what really shapes culture. So when we did our research and said, okay, what is actively creating and shaping culture? How do people feel culture most strongly in their day-to-day employee experience? You think that it's going to be something like the physical environment. Is it a fun environment? Do we have ping pong tables? Physical workplace was the last on that list. The top ones were our mission and purpose of our organization. And that makes sense because if culture is the kind of how we do things around here and mission is the why we do things together, those two should really be in sync. And then the other ones that we saw is just that the approach to employee performance, as well as how much I'm being recognized. And so kind of identifying those barriers of resistance to change and kind of identifying those things that can get over those barriers, I think can lead us through to build that kind of intentional culture.
Yeah, when you talk about change, it's not just about adapting or conforming to something that's new, right? To a new situation that we might be facing. It's really about embracing the opportunity to create something better, more than what we already have, and really sink that in. And I always say, and it seems like it comes up in a lot of conversations, is that everybody wants change, but not everyone wants to be changed. They don't have to conform to a lot of those things. They have to adapt, right, to those things. But when it comes to leadership and management, we definitely have to change. We got to understand each employee's love language, so to speak, how they connect, what disconnects them from the group or the team, and really get them to feel like they are a part of more than just what they do. There's a why tied into that meaningful and purposeful workplace. So when we talk about the managers and really enhancing managers, because pouring into the managers and leaders and workplaces is needed so much more now. So when we talk about enhancing managers' effectiveness, team engagement, and how that organizations or companies can really bring more value, more support, developing their managers and their leaders to really help build that employee success, right? what are some strategy? What are some things that you can suggest based on some of the research data that we're sharing that can help the roles of managers and leaders to help foster that effectiveness to really bring value and really elevate their team as well?
I love that you use the language of love languages there, because I think that is an obstacle for a lot of managers, is being able to individualize and tailor things like recognition or the approach to employee performance, or trying to even suggest where different career ladders and lattices might be within that organization. It really takes a little bit of empathy, a little bit of individualization from the manager's standpoint, and really being able to connect to their team and kind of identifying, how do these folks like to be recognized? What kind of feedback do they like? We found that only 1/3 of employees want to be publicly recognized for their work in front of their whole organization. And so if you're kind of doing that and thinking that you're doing a good thing to an employee, but not individualizing it, and instead what they would actually prefer is a personalized message or something like that, I think that therein lies some of the obstacles that managers face. But I always feel like when we talk about this idea of culture and engagement, we often are just pointing the fingers at managers and kind of expecting them to carry the load for the whole organization in terms of building a culture of employee success. But I think managers are the ones that really need that support and development almost the most. In our big research study about feedback and recognition, managers were way more likely than individual contributors as well as leaders to say that they want more recognition for their contributions, as well as more feedback about how they're doing in terms of managing their team. And we just don't give a lot of space to managers. Many of the managers that we have are player coaches, where they're often doing the work as well. If somebody kind of leaves at the last moment's notice, there's sometimes the people who are picking up slack, and they're the ones that are kind of filling in that role while they can find, and at the same time also probably interviewing for new candidates to replace them. So I think some good development, if you look at something like remote work, if you think about kind of how ill-prepared managers have been, I would say, for remote work, part of that is due to we never had it at scale that like we do now. About a quarter of the levels of remote work in terms of pre-pandemic versus today. And so those managers, that many of them have probably still not had that kind of development about what it takes to engage somebody when they're at home, or when you're not going to see them every day, or where you can't have that impromptu conversation. So I think one of the things is making sure that you're giving really good development to your managers. And if you're a manager, I think one of the things that you can be looking to is your team, trying to use their feedback, listen to your team, and trying to understand what are their needs, where do they want to go, where do they want to grow. And so I think if managers kind of have that sort of mindset, then I think it allows them to adapt to some of these big changes that we're seeing in organizations.
Is there anything in particular that you can speak of on when it comes to like actions or behaviors that they should really focus on to maximize that team engagement? We talk about individually, leaders and managers directly impacting their employees, but from a team perspective, what specific actions or behaviors would you suggest leaders look into when it comes to maximizing that team engagement piece?
Yeah, I'd say one of the first one is setting a cadence up that I guess employees kind of expect when it comes to giving them feedback about something. So, and that should be more frequently than you probably think. We found that almost 40% of employees want weekly one-on-one meetings with their manager, which was a surprising finding to me. And so I think if you have some sort of cadence where you're checking in, you're making sure, are there obstacles that are in your way for productivity and success this week? Are there things that I can be in your personal life that I don't know about that might be interfering? The other thing I would say is fostering a social connection on their team. So what we're seeing as we become more dispersed and we work on teams that are more matrixed and just different kind of structures of teams, is that social connection is something that we need to emphasize even more. Setting that time aside that we get to know one another and get to know the kids' names and what grade they're going in and that kind of stuff. That really, it always seems like that's the fluffy part of work, but that is really some of the part that really helps. Who can I rely on this team? Where can I look to for people when I need support and I need to be supported? So that would be another one. And then the third thing that I would say is recognition. I mean, and individualizing that recognition. So you really can't over recognize your workforce. I can't say that enough. You really should be for not only just the big projects, but also those things that are those extra role behaviors, those organizational citizenship behaviors. What are those things that you're doing to kind of pitch in for the greater good of that organization? Recognize that, because those are the behaviors that we're really trying to reinforce when we're trying to build this culture. Identify those behaviors and then go ahead and reward them for those behaviors.
Yeah, we talk about that manager support, and you threw out a word that kind of popped in my head. You mentioned the word care. People want leaders that care about them, right? We talk about that psychological definition of belonging, feeling respected, accepted, and appreciated, genuinely caring for your people. Employees, one of the data research points that really kind of stuck out with me, and I want to transition this into maybe one of our last couple of questions I want to ask you, is employees who say that their manager helps and supports them to perform at their best. Those people who are staying, like they had a sense of belonging. They wanted to stay. They had no desire to leave. They weren't thinking about a job, right? They felt connected. They felt like probably their leader cared about them. 2 times more likely to stay in their job if they had a manager who helped support them and really help them. Can you talk about that and tie into, because in the beginning you talked about retention and really attracting and retaining top talent.
Yeah.
What potential obstacles might organizations face when it comes to implementing these steps, and how they can really overcome them? And how does that connect with leadership? Does that connect with managers who care or don't care? Speak on that a little bit for us.
Absolutely. No, I think you really highlight kind of the role that managers play when it comes to employee retention. One of the fascinating findings that came out of this report that I'm really excited about is that there was really no difference in terms of the retention levels of employees who thought that their manager wasn't supportive because they were either too busy or because their manager was unsupportive because they just don't care about me. So that tells me that it doesn't necessarily matter about your intentions. You really have to show that you care. And so one of the biggest things that I think all managers and leaders for that matter are going to have when it comes to this idea of retention and building culture is just the time. So kind of like I mentioned before, managers, I think we're looking to them to kind of be the answer for all of this organizational development kind of things. And so being able to create time and space, and some of that has to do with the structure of the organization. The structure of the organization, if you have 20 direct reports, you're going to have a difficult time having individual one-on-one conversations and knowing what each individual employee's career path is going to be and what kind of recognition they like. The other thing that I think where I would kind of point the finger a little bit at leaders is that's often where we see the biggest disconnect, and where that kind of cascade of information for the rest of the organization is falling short, that kind of connection between the upper leadership and those direct managers. And so if we can kind of build that connection and making sure that we're also getting that communication through there. I mentioned managers are also the ones that want more feedback. They also want more information. They also feel like when organization changes, they're not sure why. And so if they can't communicate the why to their employee workforce, that's another barrier right there as well. And then I think finally, just in terms of resources. So just being able to prioritize things like engagement, prioritize things like retention, talking to the rest of your team about what is their intent to stay. We often call those stay surveys, but it's really just a conversation about what would make you stay. What are the things that might make you leave? And I think that those kinds of conversations can really help bridge that gap and help with that retention piece as well.
Awesome. Well, coming up to the wrap up, and I want to leave the last minute for you to kind of wrap this up. And if there's anything that maybe I haven't brought out of you that's really on your heart, that really sticks out, that you can leave with the audience today, would you mind sharing just one more thing with us?
Yeah, I think just right now, if we think about engagement and culture in general, I think right now is probably one of the most important times for organizational leaders to take this stuff seriously. We're in a labor market right now where the number of open positions are outnumbering the number of applicants out there 2 to 1. And so you're going to constantly be in this attraction mode for getting new employees into your organization. And so part of that you need to do by retaining your best, but I think also to have that magnetic culture, you also need to attract your best. And they really know, applicants will know right away, and especially during the onboarding, if the promises that you made during recruitment aren't matching with the day-to-day life and the kind of reality of what life is like in your organization, they're going to really understand that. And you're just going to have that kind of 90-day turnover. You're going to see that kind of skyrocket if you're not building this culture. So I think culture and engagement is very clearly associated with not only the leaky bucket of employees leaving, but also how to keep filling that bucket and keeping top talent within that organization.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you again, Shane. Thank Quantum Workplace for being a part of this with us, and we'll be joining you soon on the next session.
Thank you so much, George.
All right. I enjoyed that so much. I love getting to hear you, George, sharing, learning. Shane touched on one of the stats I'm going to call out later. There's so much good stuff in there. And I appreciate the intersection of the performance, the culture conversation, like all those things kind of fitting together here, because it's not just one, it's not just the other. They're not separate and discrete, and how employees feel about work wraps in and ties into every single one of those. And I saw you share one of your things that you, like the drum you're always beating, but it needs to be beaten, which is these leaders need to be developed.
Yeah.
Because they have to be able to lead themselves first before they can lead the people that we put them in charge of, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the truth. And somebody, my good friend, made a statement in the chat about how people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. And the new challenge with that, especially as you've been influencing me in this data, the data is showing me is that, and talking to a few people during this whole research study, is there's been great leaders losing great employees. They're not leaving bad companies there, and they're not leaving bad leaders. They're leaving bad culture. People are saying and seeing that leaders don't have the influence or the power to make the changes that are necessary, or they're limited. They care about their team, but they're not able to make the changes that really impacts the true culture of the company. And so when I have a leader that cannot make the change, I want to be somewhere where I belong, and that I see that sense of belonging within the organization. So people are not just leaving, the company or bad leaders, they're leaving bad culture, even if that means they're leaving their good leader behind.
I'm thinking of one of the experiences I had in the past. I had my direct leader was okay, not amazing, not terrible. They're okay. And I was learning from them. So I was willing to, stick around at this company, but everything else outside of that little umbrella was disaster, right? Falling apart, terrible. What's the phrase we used in the actual research? Like a mess, essentially,
Yeah.
dysfunctional mess.
Dysfunctional mess.
Dysfunctional mess. And at one point I was like, it doesn't matter if this person is, okay, I still can't put up with all these other things. It just overwhelms you eventually and just sucks the life out of you. And so, yeah, there's definitely some good points in there. Good insights there. So Shane, again, welcome. Welcome. Thank you. Great job. We appreciate you getting a lot of good kudos and comments in the chat there. For any of you that saw it, Shane posted it. I'll try to make sure we repost it in a minute. But we're actually doing a deep dive with the Quantum team. George and I will be doing that in about a week, 10 days. And so we'll be doing a webinar there with them to dive into some of these things, to really tease out some more stuff in and around that conversation, specifically focused on practical takeaways. Go do these things. Because my hope today, I asked you what your hope was. My hope is we don't just give you a lot of knowledge today, and then you feel more overwhelmed than you did when you started. I want you to walk away with I'm going to do these things to make an impact and to really support our people. And that's why I posted in the comments a little bit ago. If you got specific things you want to share today, we'll capture those. We'll be sharing those out afterwards as well in our event recap, to make sure we capture some of those good takeaways that all of us can learn from. So if you've got a practice like this worked for us, we want to share it here because I think everybody can benefit. Please take 30 seconds, do that in the chat sometime during the session today. Everyone else will benefit from it as well. Okay. That said, we are ready for our next session here. I'm so excited. So I've known Sarah Reynolds for years. The session here is going to be so incredible. Lots of great insight from this. The focus, the first time I ever met Sarah, was fair pay. That's been a focus for forever. And what's fun is you'll hear when we get around talking about Twitter accounts and things, that's Sarah's name on there, Fair Pay Monster, I think. So anyway, throw that out at the end of the session, but fair pay, how pay ties into this bigger conversation. Many of us probably have had discussions in the last year or two about pay transparency, pay compression. How do we make all these things work together? So we're going to bring all that together around this culture and the retention conversation. Pay isn't all that matters, but it does matter. And how we treat it in this transparency conversation really does matter. And that's what Sarah is super fired up about. You'll hear it really quickly. Super smart in this, really fired up about it. And it's going to help give us some ideas on how to give our managers a way to talk about these things in a way that employees can appreciate. So without any further ado, let's jump in here and hear from Sarah. Everyone, welcome to our conversation here on this research release live stream. I've been having so much fun diving into some of the key things that we're learning from this new research, what we're finding in the data, what the insights are telling us, honestly, about how work is working right now. And I'm so excited to have Sarah Reynolds here with me from the team over at HiBob. They do a ton of great work in the space around connecting people in global workforces, connecting organizations that really care about culture and how they treat their people, all kinds of good stuff. Sarah, glad to have you here with me.
Thank you so much for having me on. Really excited to be talking about the research today.
It should be a lot of fun. And before we get into some of the good stuff, let's take just a minute, tell the audience more about who Sarah is and what you do.
So my name is Sarah, as you've all learned. My pronouns in English are they and them, and I am Chief Marketing Officer at a company called HiBob. As Ben said, HiBob is an HR platform for the types of businesses who really care about their people, especially if you are a member of what we call the 3M Club. So if your business is modern, you're people first, you're multinational, and you're mid-size, we are a great HR platform for you to consider. So we'd love to talk to you, obviously, and we are so excited to be talking about one of my favorite topics today, which is the intersection between performance, compensation, philosophy, culture, all these great topics that are really top of mind for all of our clients as well.
Excellent. Wonderful. So as you kind of hinted there, we're talking a lot about culture, employee engagement, performance, like all those things today are big parts of our conversation. And one of the things that I know for sure the data are telling us is that there's a very strong connection between a company's pay philosophy and their ability to actually retain their staff and really connect with them, help them to feel tethered and connect to the organization like they do care. I'd love to just start off with that kind of broad statement there. What's your thought on that? What's your take on that? Is that accurate? Am I completely off base?
I think it's a great call out. Thinking about your pay philosophy as part of your overall EVP, that employee value proposition is so critical when you are thinking about like, how are we going to make the right decisions around pay and around recognition, maybe more broadly in our organization in alignment with our culture, because it's our culture that makes the EVP work for our organization. And it makes the EVP realistic for our organization when our culture and our philosophies align with what we're selling people on, maybe in the candidate experience or even in the employee positioning experience. So I think it's critical that you make that philosophy, especially when we're talking about something that is so important and so emotional to so many of us, a topic like pay. Employees are there. A lot of employees are there because they get paid, right? They wouldn't maybe choose to hang out with you all day, every day if they weren't being paid. It's why we call it work, not fun, yes. Right? It's important to keep that in mind. And it's important to remember that this is a really big intersection point between how employees see your organization and see you living your culture and your values and see you living that philosophy and see that actually coming to life in their day-to-day experience or their every 2-week experience of logging into their bank account and checking out what you've paid them. So I do think that it makes perfect sense that you're seeing a correlation in the data between those two items because it's such a big part of the employee experience of your organization. Do you live by that philosophy or not?
If we say we care about people, do we actually demonstrate that? This becomes a tangible piece of that, as you're saying there.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So one of the things that stands out to me in some of our new research here, one of the things that stands out to me is that we see companies that have better revenue, better retention, we call those high performers. Those companies are 3 times more likely to have a structured, specific, repetitive process for how they look at their jobs, how they market price them, how they make sure they're paying people accurately compared to what's equitable out in the open market out there. And I know this is one of the things that the team at HiBob has been talking about, prioritizing, focusing on as a way to really help employers make this bigger conversation about pay more tangible. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that having a consistent methodology for how do you define a job, How do you place it within the other jobs in your organization, whether you go as far as calling that a job architecture or it's a little more informal? And then also, how do you compensate people in that job fairly, meaning like equitably internally and also competitively to the market? All of that is really critical. So I think as you're thinking about, if you're thinking about evolving your compensation practice to get more structure because you want to be one of those high performing companies where structure is correlated, I think that you want to look at, really getting to the fundamentals of compensation. So you need that philosophy. You got to figure out like, what is our position, right? Because it's going to inform how you actually do the work. And then you need to think about, okay, how do the jobs relate to each other in my organization? Doesn't need to be a full job architecture project, but just having some idea about jobs within certain departments and how they intersect with each other. Maybe you want to take a first crack at some salary bands or a salary structure for your organization and how jobs fall, even just with your current market pricing or your current pricing activities more broadly today. How do jobs fall in relation to each other? What jobs are grouped together in similar pay ranges, or should they be? Or do you have the right types of jobs grouped together? And then when you think about the individual ranges for each of those jobs, where do employees fall today on those ranges? What's your position versus the market? How fast is the market moving? All of us are really cognizant, I think, right now of the macro and the things that we don't control in our organizations. That market could be moving really quickly. That market could be moving a little more slowly. It could depend job by job. It could depend who you compete with for talent. You want to keep an eye on that, and you want to make sure we have a consistent approach to each of these jobs. How are we going to price it versus the market? How are we going to keep pace with the market for folks who currently exist in our organization? And then how are we going to make sure that we're continuing to make equitable decisions for folks who are in our organization already and entering our organization, so that we don't end up in a situation like salary compression or something that's not fun, and it ultimately creates inequities that undermine that pay philosophy and that story that you're trying to educate employees on why you're a fair employer, why you're an employer of choice, like why you're making the right decisions when it comes to pay, and ultimately improve that relationship with them.
I don't know if you and I have ever had this conversation, but I would love to get your take on this. You talked about a couple things there I think are so important. And one of the things that stood out to me is there are different stakeholders in this, right? It's not just someone in HR who says, okay, let's figure out what comp is and tell everybody. But right, there are managers who get asked by employees, hey, what's next for me? And do they have the information they need? What does that look like? What does that experience look like from an employee perspective? If the manager's like, to get back to work, or if it's like, hey, yeah, actually, Sarah, well, let's talk about what your comp looks like right now. Here's what it's going to take for you to get to the next level. Here's some ideas on the skills I'm looking for. Like being able to have a conversation, at least at some rudimentary level, is what that employee's experience is from a pay transparency perspective in many cases. Talk about that a little bit. What are your thoughts on that piece of it? Because I feel like when someone says pay transparency, everybody gets a little bit nervous in the HR world because they think that means let's take all of our stuff and post it on the internet in a spreadsheet. And that's not always what we mean by pay transparency. That's on one like far edge to the extreme. Talk about that piece a little bit, because I'd love to get your take on this.
We think about pay transparency absolutely as a spectrum. It is not an on and off switch, right? And it's not you say nothing or you post everyone's name and face and salary on the internet on your company website, right? There are many different steps along the spectrum. And part of determining your pay philosophy is communicating to employees, is deciding where you fall today or where you want to get to, and then communicating to employees about where you are and why you've chosen that, or what steps you're taking to make the conversation more transparent in your organization. So you might be an organization where everything is a secret today, and you're really challenged by compliance in certain geos where you operate that now says, hey, you got to post a salary range on a job. So first you got to make sure you have a salary range for that job. And then you got to post it live, which suddenly means you're being pushed out of your organizational comfort zone around, secrecy of pay, but you're doing it because of compliance. There's a compliance vehicle that's requiring you to do it, right? But you can think about this more proactively. It doesn't just have to be a reactive response to compliance, right? You can think about, okay, you have pay bands for your jobs, or you have pay ranges for your jobs. The first step is, do HR and finance know what those are in every organization? As long as you got a pay band, probably your HR and finance team knows, right? Yes. Now you want to talk about, does the manager know? To your point about it, if an employee shows up to their manager and says, is my pay fair? Or I don't think my pay is fair. Did you give your manager enough information to be able to say, here's where you fall on the spectrum, or yes, I know I confidently as a manager can communicate to you that your pay is fair because you fall within our pay band, right? On that job, maybe you want to push to employees start to know their pay bands. You are really confident and you want employees to know what's the range for this job? Where do I fall within the range? Because you want to make it part of your annual process about, hey, how do we get you higher in that range? What sorts of skills would you need to develop? What sorts of competencies would you need to master or demonstrate to the organization to bring you higher in that range? Maybe you want employees to know their range. And if they're getting to the top, or if they're a high potential employee, you want to talk to them about what is the next range for them and how do you, again, make the shift there. Maybe you want employees to have access to all of your pay ranges. You want them to know what the broader salary structure looks like for your organization, not where everyone sits, but just what the structure looks like. So they can say, hey, it's not just that I have an opportunity now or an opportunity for my next role. I have an opportunity to be a VP level. I have an opportunity if I want to move into the executive level. Like, this is the type of opportunity for me at this organization right now. And then, of course, there are organizations, either because of a compliance mandate or in their industry, or because they've chosen to, who want to go as far as saying employees know what everyone makes. It's a challenging position to take. There are lots of really great, interesting case studies about companies who've tried this, like private companies primarily. There's also the US government, who's like a classic example of like, hey, you want to go look up what everybody makes in the organization? Here you go. You can imagine that the private companies, startups who try this, and the US federal government have really different pay philosophies, but they've ended up at the same transparency sort of place. It's a really interesting comparison point. But regardless of where you choose to fall on the spectrum, and if you're moving up the spectrum, I think it's just about make a plan, be consistent, communicate it with employees, and tell them why. Help them understand why you're not going to move to that fully transparent place, but you are going to move to this place that is right for the organization and right for their career pathing and right for the communication around the opportunity to them.
We talked about the job postings piece of this, where that's some of their compliance requirement for a lot of companies. And the first thing that I started hearing from people, like recruiters talk to me about it, of course, it's part of their job. Right? I've got to share these things out. But then people start saying, are our employees looking at these ranges, by the way? Like, this might create some weird conversations. Yes, they are, absolutely. So you need to be empowered. You need to be have your leaders ready to have that conversation with someone, because if someone comes back and says, wait a minute, I'm making this, and that the bottom of that range is 10K above what I make, and that's actually my job title. What's going on here? They need to be able to say, hey, here's what we have to post externally, here's why, or whatever it is, or hey, you know what? You are completely underneath. Let's fix that. Let's work on that. But they can at least have a conversation about it, instead of it being, I'm not sure, you've probably got some things to do. You should probably get back to work and solve for that, because they're not going to stick around very long. To go back to that retention piece I talked about earlier, right? That connection piece, they're going to feel like, oh, this company really doesn't care. They may say they do, but they don't show it, and how they're acting, how they're carrying things out day to day, how they're prioritizing my financial well-being from this perspective. All those kind of things fit together in this. It's not a neat little package. It's kind of messy package. We're humans, but there's all these things do connect at some point in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I would think too about a lot of us tend to think about, oh, well, my employees ask about compensation once a year, twice a year, in perfect alignment with my annual compensation cycle. The reality is, right? Yeah, exactly. The reality is employees think, again, it's whether you're paying every week, every 2 weeks, twice a month, whatever it is an omnipresent concern for your employees. It is a very visible way that they interact with your organization. They are thinking about career development all the time, which means they're thinking about remuneration all the time. You want them to understand, or you want your managers to be able to really confidently communicate with them all the time about that topic, because guess what? Employees don't write you like a fair warning letter like, hey, I'm going to show up to my one-on-one this week and ask about compensation. Oftentimes that's a surprise to a manager. They get landed in a conversation that they need really to be organizationally like well prepared for. So it's about, the training you offer them. It's also about the tooling that you offer them. And Bob, for example, if I'm going to do an annual compensation cycle, well, I can see the comp ratio for my employees and I can see where they fall in the range of their job band. I can also go see that day to day if I want a refresher, or if somebody says, hey, I want to talk to you about this today, I can go look it up. That's really important, because as a manager, like, I need to be able to confidently communicate. I can't just say, yeah, let me ask HR, let me get back to you maybe in 6 months when we do a comp cycle. I don't know. That's not a good employee experience. That's not your pay philosophy being brought to life. You want to do better. And so it's about, how do you make that possible for your managers?
I just actually finished a conversation before you and I came together here, talking to a leader that said, I'm hearing more and more from other stakeholders outside of HR that are saying, hey, can I understand this compensation piece? Can I understand or have some transparency or some clarity on what's happening in this area? And it's not about, again, opening the books of everything and here's how we make every decision and here's all the grades and levels. Like that gets to be too much for the average person. But to say, as an employee, these are the 2 or 3 concerns that I have about this. And you've outlined some really good ones, right? It's a one-on-one, it's a annual compensation review. It's, hey, I got an offer from someone else. Is this really competitive? Are they offering me something that I should be earning here? All those kind of things come in when you may not ever expect it, and being able to have that conversation is a powerful one.
Absolutely.
One of the other things I wanted to chat with you about, because a part of today's conversation is around performance and how that fits in this bigger picture. And we have seen more companies in the research that are going away from just saying, okay, we're going to pay for performance because it's hard and there's bias in that. And there's all kinds of other factors that weave in that make it really difficult to do it. And they're saying, we're going to start paying for potential, start paying for your development, your growth, really prioritizing those kinds of things in there. And I talked about bias as maybe a reason for that, but do you see that broadly happening, that short trend happening? I know you keep your fingers kind of on the pulse of stuff. And if so, do you think the bias is the primary driver? Are there other things in there that are pushing that? Maybe it's hard to measure performance. Maybe, I don't know. What's your thought?
In working with clients, because we have performance management capabilities in Bob, it's a topic that comes up all the time. How do I move away from a traditional 5-point or 4-point performance rating score? I talked to a client of ours at our recent Hardcore HR community event in London who gave a great presentation about why they had done away with the actual numerical scoring around performance in their organization. They gave the example of an employee who used to host all the after work happy hours and used to be available 24/7 and recently went through a family change where now they have a new baby and they need to have a little bit different work-life balance. And they saw on a rating scale, they had a 5-point scale. They saw 1 year he was rated a 5 and the next year he was rated a 3. And they were like, somebody flagged this as like, oh my God, what's happening with this person's performance? When in reality, he's still meeting expectations. He's still doing his job. It's just that you can't require or you can't expect that someone who also has a new baby at home is also the champion office ping pong champion or is hosting your sales development team at the local pub or, is able to dedicate the same number of hours because before and after a family change that they were before, right? Part of prioritizing work-life balance is being able to make those right decisions for your employees. But it also shined a light for her on why performance ratings with a number were outdated. So yeah, absolutely. There's companies who are thinking about how do I move away from the number? How do I move away from stack ranking my employees in my departments? How do I talk about things like skill development and rewarding people for skill development, which is a hot topic in the HR industry right now? How do I talk about rewarding for potential, rewarding for future growth? I think you asked about bias, and I love talking about all the ways that bias intersects. I think if your main goal of moving away from performance is to eliminate bias, you also got to think really critically about how do you evaluate potential? Because guess what? All those things that you have in unconscious bias that maybe affect how you score someone's performance are also going to affect how you perceive their potential. So there's a lot of training that you need to do there if you're going to move from one to the other so that you don't just do the bad thing from a different dimension, right? You don't want that in your organization. Your managers don't want that. And when it comes to intersecting with pay, though, it's a really interesting conversation because if you don't have a performance rating score, how do you do a classic merit matrix where you compare position to market or position in range versus performance, right? If you swap that one for some sort of potential rating, then yeah, you could use a potential rating. You might also want to think about things like how do I reward for compensable factors, meaning skills or specific years of experience or specific educational requirements that are required in my field or with my employees. You might choose to take a more holistic approach and not say, well, it's going to be as managed as a merit matrix. I'm going to give my managers a budget and give them a lot more training about how to think about the different elements, but ultimately we're going to trust them to be able to balance against each of these things. You might give them more direction, meaning like, hey, the market is moving really quickly and we need to focus on market adjustments first. And after market adjustments, that's when we start to think about promotions and all of these great things. You got to think about like we can engineer the best sort of like idea of compensation decision making in our organization, but at the end of the day, you need to empower your managers to do it because to your point, it's not a back office HR finance conversation about everyone's pay raise this year. It is a manager who is making those decisions, and you want them to be making them in a really thoughtful way, without bias, and in a way that really does reward the types of things that belong to your organization from a culture perspective or from a values perspective.
I'll throw one more fun wrinkle in there too, to tie into some of the other things you were saying there about why the old approach may not be the best approach. One of the things we saw in the data is that 4 out of every 10 workers said that they do not have full clarity on all their performance expectations, right, at work. And so if that's the case, how do they know when they come to that manager about, hey, what's my pay? Like, they can have that conversation then about, well, here's what we expect. And this is when you get paid, right? Your raise is effective when you're effective. Here's how we can work through those things. So all kinds of different pieces of that. I really like the dive there into the potential piece and how that's often a reflection of the same kinds of biases that can pop up when we're looking at someone's performance. Not, oh, I really like Sarah because they're a great person and top scores, right? Because all the hosting the pub night, like all the kind of fun stuff I was thinking about a minute ago, but may not be best at their job, may not be as good as someone else, but you start to like them. It starts to affect those sorts of things. All that feeds into it. I think the last I saw, there's a wheel of bias out there you can look up, and it's got like 188 different cognitive biases that we have that when we're making decisions. And I always say, if it affects how we're buying jelly at the grocery store, it's affecting how we're treating people when it comes to work too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all about, how do you have some level of consistency in how you measure and then how you reward, right? So, because especially when you start cascading this out into the organization, every manager is going to have a different interpretation, or they're going to come to the table with different biases, or maybe they're going to come to the table with different teams at different levels of maturity, or some folks they hired and some folks who are from a previous leaders hiring pool, right? Where they have really different expectations, or they have really different hiring postures at the time, or whatever it is, right? So, but think about, again, like you can design like the most beautiful thing in HR land, and then people come into play. So think about, how do you drive consistency in measurement and consistency in rewards across all of your managers in the organization, because you want them to feel empowered to make these decisions for their team.
All right. So I think that's a great segue to wrap up on. If someone wants to know more about what the team at Bob is doing, right, how you're serving employers, how you're helping them to solve some of these challenges and to get better clarity on performance, on comp, on those other pieces of this bigger puzzle, what's the best way for them to connect or learn more?
We would love for you to come and meet Bob. You can go to hibob.com to say hi to Bob or hi to me. You can also connect with me directly on LinkedIn or on Twitter for as long as Twitter lasts. I tweet at Fair Pay Monster. I love this topic. It's really important to me, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. So whether you'd like to, hear me shouting into the void about this topic on the internet, or you'd like to learn more about Bob, we would love to have you. And we are so glad that, Ben, you are here, as we say at Hi Bob. We are really thankful to have been invited.
So, absolutely. So glad to have you here, Sarah, and to all the rest of you, hang tight for more good stuff coming right up. All right. I told you, Sarah, like super nerdy. I think Sarah used the term dork in the comments, like I'm a top dork, right?
Yeah, I was feedback. So I had it going on the other one as well.
You listening?
You hear yourself wondering.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Goodness gracious. Good stuff there. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is we talked a little bit about how these things intersect with performance, and they intersect with culture, and it's not like I pay you more so you'll stay longer. That does factor into it some, but as Sarah and I talked through, for all of you listening in, it's, do our managers have the ability? Because part of what we see in this research, and what you're going to talk about, George, in a little bit, and I'll share some of the stats, and Shane's talked about, and so on. The support of a manager influences whether an employee will stay at the company more than anything else. That keeps coming up over and over again. And part of what Sarah and I talked about was the support could mean when someone comes and says, hey, how's my pay figured out? And what does it take for me to get to the next level? If the manager gives them the blank stare or darts from the room because they don't know the answer, that says something to them. That says a negative message to that employee. And so we need to be able to make sure our managers are able to do that. So when I was asking earlier in the chat, any practical examples, that's one. I'll try to make sure I post it so it's in there so I can catalog them all. But that's another really straightforward one. Your managers need to know the pay for their people, what that range looks like. And if someone asks them, they need to be able to at least give them some cursory explanation of, oh yeah, we do have a structure for that. And here's where we see ourselves in the market. And here's how we fit internally. And here's what it takes you to get from point A to point B. Just a short and sweet example of being able to talk through that with their employees makes a big difference. Right, George, I know when I think about the leaders I've had, and probably the leaders you've had, if you go to them and you ask them something you think they know and they are clueless about it, and you lose a little bit of faith in them.
Yeah, that goes to, and the word came up again right now. So far, the word of the day is consistency, right?
Yes.
I've heard consistency. I've heard the transparency, and it's important, one, to know for a few reasons. Ben, is understanding where I am and where I want to be, and then how can I get there. People want to know those things, that growth pattern, that growth and elevation. It may not be a growth with the title because they love and their gift, right? The energy bus, they're in the right seat. And so, how do we develop while we're staying in the right seat so we're not moving to another position just for more pay, but we're valued for who we are and where we are and where we bring strength and value at. And so having that clarity to know, hey, this is where you are, this is where you can be. It gives you more clarity as you're doing reviews, as you're doing performance reviews within an organization. Say, hey, this is how you can move forward. It gives an idea of what that growth pattern looks like, if there is one or if there is not one, right? And so we see a lot of that transparency. And that the important piece is making sure that we as leaders, managers, HR leaders that are dealing with these understand the why. Because if you don't understand the why, then that becomes confusing to the employee. Because if they don't know, you don't know, who knows?
It's a scary point to be. Like, if I don't know this, you don't know. These are the two most trusted agents in the organization. And if okay, goodness. All right. So we have one more session here coming with Josh Merrell from Confirm. We're going to talk about performance, like a deep dive into that, some of the science behind it, because we touched on a little bit with Sarah, we touched on it a little bit with Shane, in the middle of some other things, but this one's a deep dive on the performance piece. So if you want some notes, some ideas on this, we're going to really talk about the science behind it and some of the things that most of us were trained on classically in HR that may be completely backwards and wrong, which is probably a good lead in for this. So let's dive in. We'll come back. We'll share some research with you to wrap it up in the next hour or so. So hang tight. Here comes Josh Merrell. Welcome to this session here. We're going to dive into performance. What's amazing about it, why performance management is broken in a lot of companies, some of the things we can do to overcome that. And I'm so thrilled to have Josh here with me. We're going to dive into some good stuff. Josh, welcome. Good to have you.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's going to be a blast. And before we get into this, I want you to take a minute and tell the audience a little more about who you are and what you do, what the team at Confirm does, and what you do specifically.
Yeah, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Confirm. We're a platform in the performance management space. Prior to that, I spent 6 years at a company called Carta, a fintech startup. I was the chief product officer there, and I suffered all of the pain of performance management as both an executive and someone who was reviewed myself. And Confirm, in many ways, is the platform that I wish I had had when I was working at Carta.
Excellent. I can't wait to unpack that conversation here. I talked to so many leaders. That's the starting point is, man, this was terrible before, and I don't want to be terrible for anybody else ever again. So let's solve this problem. I actually had a chance. I was at an event earlier this year in Las Vegas, was running with one of your key salespeople out there on the streets of Las Vegas. And that was her story too. She said, I got, this review thing was completely broken and everybody knew it. And I got passed over for something that I had earned. And
absolutely.
I was like, gosh, I got to find a place to solve that, and ended up at Confirm. I get to do this for everybody else now. And you don't find some more. They say that shared is just sales. It's just shared enthusiasm. And in that case, it's just like enthusiastic about finding this big solution. So that's cool.
Totally. And we hire so many people who have a chip on their shoulder from their performance reviews. And it's great because the companies that they're coming from are usually so bad at identifying great talent because they're using traditional methods, and then they come and join Confirm. So it's sort of our talent arbitrage when we go to hire.
I'll have to make a note of that one. I love that phrase, talent arbitrage. Okay, so let's dive into this conversation, because I think I really want to get into some of these things. I know that the leaders listening into this, the HR leaders listening in right now, all of them have a process in place, good, bad, ugly. They have a process in place. And by the way, for those of you listening in, feel free to let me know, like, good, it's bad, it's ugly. Looking forward to hearing some things from Josh in this. I'd love to just get a quick temperature check on the audience there as we're going through this. But one of the things I'll tell you is, when we were looking at the research we just finished and we've been unpacking today at the event, one of the things that stood out to me is we asked workers if the performance processes they were going through were about just proving themselves again, like, I'm still worthy of your respect as a person, or improving. How do we help them be better tomorrow than they were yesterday? And unfortunately, we saw more workers told us it was the former. Like, it's just about trying to prove myself and trying to, oh yeah, I kept track of all the things I did, and let me come back and try to remind you that I'm still worthy of being here. And they're spending all this time and effort trying to do those kind of things. And it pains me, unfortunately. I want to know, does that surprise you? Is that like, absolutely, that's what I expected? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's natural given the system that we've set up today. And I think that's, it may be important to unpack that. So if you look at where performance reviews came from, and what I'm really honing on here is like the 5-point manager rating scale. Like that is the fundamental tool that we have to measure an employee's performance. So 5-point manager's rating scale, it's 100 years old. So it came out of the US military after World War I. It was brought into the workplace in the 1920s. This is before commercial air travel. This is before computers, right? This is before cell phones. We had introduced the 5-point manager rating scale. And that was a world of work that was repetitive, work was solitary, wasn't particularly interconnected. Managers were literally sitting shoulder to shoulder with the people that they were rating. So they had a lot of visibility. So work gets more complex as the decades go on, and you have the rise of the 360s in the 80s and 90s. But the problem with all of those old methodologies is they just don't match the way that we work today. Like the way we work today, especially since the pandemic, is completely different. The way we work today is in networks, right? And what that really means is your company is probably using Slack or Teams. You can hop on and have direct access to everybody else in the organization, and they have direct access to you. We're more collaborative and cross-functional than we've ever been. And by the way, like we may be part of a team from all over the world that goes and solves a problem because we have Zoom and Google Meet and WebEx, but we still evaluate that work the way that a manager would have 100 years ago in a pre-digital workspace. And I think when you talk about workers who are more focused on proving themselves, where it starts to become sort of performance theater rather than an actual performance rating and real conversation around it, is we are given that history of performance reviews. We've set up an incentive system where the manager's rating, the manager's point of view is the end all be all of somebody's performance. And so my incentive as an individual contributor is not necessarily to do the best job, although that it helps, but really the important thing is that my manager believes I'm doing the best job.
Marketing.
That's right. It's self-promotion. And if I do that well, then my manager will support me. And then my manager also has to be able to influence and advocate on my behalf relative to all the other managers who are trying to do the same thing for their teams. That's the incentive system that we've set up. So, if an employee says, yeah, I'm focused on proving myself, it's this pointless exercise, that doesn't surprise me at all. That's what we're incentivizing today.
You mentioned the 5-point rating scale, and I will kid you not, I heard a presentation years ago, and this leader saying, we've changed everything. We've got away from this. We've solved this. We now have a 4-point rating scale. So no one can pick the middle one anymore. Like they're forced to go above the line or below the line. Like this was the most revolutionary thing, but all of the other variables were still exactly the same. Still the same incentive, totally. Still the same setup. It's just like, now you can't pick 3. You got to pick 2 or 4, essentially. They changed that up. And so
it's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah. Yes. Here's the real problem. When you vest everything into one manager's point of view, look, the reality is if you go back to the way that we work being in networks, the reality is a lot of the work, a lot of the value gets created outside of the manager's visibility. Like the type of worker that we reward today as managers is the person who you can give a problem to and say, hey, great, call me if you get stuck, right? And they come back a week later and they say, here's the answer, right? I solved it. Or here's my recommendation. And what might have happened in between those 2 points in time is a dozen conversations with stakeholders, with customers, with all the people who are important to the process. But what we really reward is that autonomy and that ability to go out and independently problem solve. And that doesn't get captured. That's why people feel the need to self-promote, to try to prove their value. So we've created this incentive system that doesn't match the way that we work today.
That's a really great example of that. I also talk about the fact that you mentioned they were working shoulder by shoulder, like physical environments. Now, when so much happens up here, you can't, how do you categorize that? How do you say that person's really, truly a critical thinker? Maybe they know the best place to go ask someone else, in your example, to ask someone else who the best person is, and they're really good at connecting. They might not have all the answers, but they know where to get them. Like we appreciate those things, but it's hard to reward that in the, oh no, this is the best person for this thing. They always get above.
Oh my God, but you're so right. Like when I was in college, like they taught me to manage by walking around. Like somebody show me how to do that over Zoom. You can't be in every Zoom call. You can't be in every Slack channel. Like there is just, you as a manager nowadays, you just have to accept that you are going to get personally 15 to 20% of the picture, right? Everything else is going to happen outside of your visibility. And yet you are still the person responsible for that rating at the end of the day.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem, but we've unpacked that. We've really highlighted some of the shortcomings of how things are done. I'd love to hear from you. You work with a range of companies that are really committed to doing this equitably, doing this in a better and more accurate way overall. What do you see as kind of a commonality, or what commonalities exist among those companies that you're working with that are really just doing a great job at this, that the people listening in right now can take some good ideas from?
Yeah, totally. And I'll try to answer your question without plugging our own platform too much, but we obviously have built our best practices into a solution. So what we do and what we see a lot of great companies do that we don't work with is to use a technique called organizational network analysis, ONA. So what ONA says is treat the organization like a network, like the network that it really is, and actually allow people to review other folks who maybe weren't in that chain of command or maybe weren't in the same team, right? Because we work cross-functionally and collaboratively. So when we do performance cycles with our customers, the questions that we have their employees answer are things like, who do you go to for help and advice? Right? You can pick anybody in the organization. Who energizes you? Who do you see making an outstanding impact? Who are you concerned needs extra support? And what you typically find is this, and I think this is a little bit, this is kind of one of the deep misconceptions in performance management, that we think that performance follows this bell curve because that's what you get when you do a traditional manager rating performance cycle. You get this bell curve of manager ratings. But when you ask questions like those, what you really get are power laws. So you get what you get the 20% of employees who are generating 80% of the impact. And when you ask a question like, who do you go to for help and advice? What comes out of that really quickly is you have these subject matter experts in the organization that everybody is going to for help and advice. And suddenly you can say, okay, actually, these people are really critical. These are the knowledge holders, they're the connectors. That's what we tend to see in every performance cycle that we do with our customers.
I love the idea that we're recognizing the people that may not be on the org chart in a high position or in a key slot, right? They're not on the succession plan, but they may be a key person who everyone else goes to because they're just reliable. They have good ideas, like all those kinds of things. The normal system, as you said, it doesn't always reflect on that. Maybe their manager really loves them and advocates for them and is recognizing those things. But if they don't have a leader like that, or they have a manager that's just plain too busy to pay attention to them and really give them the credit and the attention they deserve, that person's going to eventually quit and leave when they're an amazing contributor to the business. No one else has just spotted it yet because they don't have that insight.
Totally. How many times in our careers have we seen those people who are really great at managing up, but they're not really driving impact, or worse, like people actively avoid them because they don't like working with them. And we see them get promoted and we see them get rewarded. You know, we actually see it happen so often in our data that people who are not great at managing up or not great self-promoters, we actually find they often have these networks of people who they're energizing, who they're helping and influencing behind the scenes. It happens so often that we started calling them quiet contributors now. We've all read about quiet quitters, but there are these quiet contributors who they're not necessarily going to be the people who speak up in meetings every time. As a manager, like, you know who those people are, right? They're already on your radar, the vocal people, but there are a lot of these quiet contributors out there, and it's really important for companies to identify who they are.
This reminds me, years ago, I heard this gentleman speaking. This must have been early in my HR career. I was still doing like HR assistant, the grunt work of HR, but this stood out to me so much. He talked about how every company's, most of the companies out there, like, we want A players. We want only the very, very best people. And he said, a lot of times you'll find that you get an A player who wants to all the spotlight. They want to be the star. It's like, you can hire someone that performs well, but elevates performance of everybody around them. And they'll run circles around that team that's got one superstar that everybody is annoyed by. And everybody else is just trying to get their stuff done. And they're like, I can't get any spotlight because they're hogging it all. So that idea of having someone, the quiet contributor piece that you mentioned there, like I love that because that happens in every company out there. And in the last year or two, with the conversations around quiet quitting, I saw so many HR leaders saying, hey, I just want to real quickly acknowledge that we have people that don't cause a fuss. They show up and do their work. And I am so thankful for them because they make our job easier. They don't cause problems. They don't cause waves. They're just quietly being great employees. And we're thankful for those people. And I don't think they get enough
Absolutely.
credit for that.
Yeah, totally. And going back to these ideas of power laws, which is a really big shift in thinking that 5 to 10% of your employees are driving 40 to 50% of the business value. But when you go to these power laws and you see that there are those small minority of people who are driving outsized impact, what we actually also find is there is a small minority of employees who drive outsized concern. One way to think about that is your top performers are producing at 10x the next tier of employees. Well, your most toxic employees are creating concern or creating toxicity at 10x the next tier, right? And it's really important to identify who each of those people are, because they're going to have outsized effects on everything from, of course, driving business value and impact to culture and retention, even referrals, right? What you really want is for those 5 to 10% of people who are really exceptional, you want them to refer the best people that they've ever worked with into your organization. And so it's really key to identify who those people are at both ends of the spectrum. And the point is that manager ratings won't actually tell you who those people are.
Okay. I'm enjoying this so much. Man, I want to ask 15 more questions to follow up all of that, because that's such good stuff. One of the things I want to touch on in the conversation with you, though, and I know we've kind of danced around this a little bit, is the bias piece. So much of how performance is done right now, there are all these different biases that exist. If you actually go out there and look it up at some point when we're not here talking in the live stream, everybody else, there's actually 180 plus different biases out there. And if they affect how we're buying jelly at the grocery store, they're affecting how we interact with people when it comes to work. So all those things exist. And I love that we're talking about the O&A piece, puts a little bit of science into this, puts a little more, right, something more predictable into it. So it's easier to get away from the bias and have a more structured and data-driven approach. Talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind, because I think that's an opportunity for a lot of leaders right now that are thinking about, okay, if I need one more thing to help me get away from this is one, maybe put the nail in the coffin on the traditional approach and help us move to something better.
Yeah, totally. So bias plays a huge role in manager ratings. So many of us have heard about or read a study. This is the Skull and Mountain Goff study, actually, that talks about how much of a performance rating from a manager is actually biased. What they found was that about 60% of a manager's rating can be explained by the manager's own idiosyncrasies. That is to say, bias. Now, what you might assume from that is that, the other 40% is actually the employee's performance. It's not. So it gets worse. So 60%
buddy.
That's right. 60% of a manager's rating is bias. 20% is actually noise in their measurement. And then the remaining 20% is the employee's actual performance and contribution. So I think if you were to say like, okay, clean sheet of paper, like we're going to design a much better performance management system from the ground up. I think going back to that point at the beginning of our conversation, you would say advancement shouldn't be based on my manager's ability to advocate or influence. It should be on my own contributions. That should be the most important factor. I think you'd also say, well, if my manager's rating is the thing that unlocks my advancement and it's 60% bias and 20% noise, that's not a really good signal either. We need something different. And that's really where we turn to organizational network analysis. What we actually find in practice is that by having a large sample size, so when we ask that question, say, who do you go to for help and advice? What we typically find is the most helpful or sought after experts in an organization they could have anywhere from a couple of dozen coworkers who identify them as a source of expertise and help to maybe 70 or 80. So huge effects. And what starts to come out of that, if you're familiar maybe with if I can use like the gumball metaphor. So if you ever went to like a county fair or something, there's always there's a gumball machine. It's like, guess how many gumballs are in the gumball machine? Yes. Now, if I guess, like we're probably going to be wrong. We're probably going to be really wrong. But it turns out that actually if you get the guesses of all the people who are walking by, and you actually average it out, it's scarily accurate to the number of gumballs that are actually in that machine. So you have the power of sample size. You could also call it the wisdom of the crowds. That's what O&A brings to the table to help identify the top performers, those top experts, and also sometimes those top employees of concern. So it's a really important tool, and it doesn't necessarily have to replace your manager's point of view, but it can give them a much broader perspective in a world of work that is networked, where a lot of the work is invisible to the manager. It happens outside of their visibility. It allows them to make a much more accurate assessment.
I keep going back in my head to the number you threw out earlier about managers see about 15% or so of the work that their people are doing right today. And to be able to say the other 85% is, let's cross our fingers and hope whenever I give you this rating, it's going to be the right one. And that unfortunately is happening right now, probably as we speak right now. It's happening somewhere, but that scares the pants off me to think about that happening. So the leaders out there listening into this we've got some good ideas, some amazing stats and examples you brought to this, which I love. I'm always a data nerd, so I appreciate those. If anyone wants to know more about what the team at Confirm is doing, how you're helping to do this for your clients, things like that, and they want to connect or learn more, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, go to confirm.com or just email me directly. I'm just josh@confirm.com. I answer every email, and I can talk about performance all day.
Yeah, as we can tell, you got stats and studies, and there's one more to come, and everything else. It's been great. Goodness, I enjoy this so much. I know everybody else
Absolutely.
out there, like so one of the things I've done at events in the past is like a hackathon for HR pros, and almost always when I'm in a crowd of 20 people or so, a couple of them in the room are like, performance is my thing. I've got to figure out how to hack this and change this because it's just terrible. And so I'm imagining that the audience out there listening in right now, there's a good number of you that are saying, we may be doing okay over here or okay over there, but we could do this better. And I hope you got some great notes and ideas from Josh. Thank you, my friend, for spending time with us. This has been a blast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. To everybody else out there, hang tight for more good research, good stuff coming shortly on the live stream. Okay. I hope all of you enjoyed that. I know I did. Josh has some great stories, great examples, great data points to pull in and help to make this very tangible, very understandable for all of us when it comes to the performance piece. It's easy to get wrapped up in that, well, it's hard, but is there something better? And as we've heard from him, there are some better ways, some things to get away from, and some warning signs around how that's done currently to help you get your arms around that a little bit. Okay, so we've got about 40 minutes left on our live stream today. I'm gonna pass the baton over to George, I guess, and let you jump in here. So the plan was to let George share some of the data points that really spoke to him, as I mentioned earlier, go through a couple of those things, highlight the things that stood out to him, some good takeaways for all of you. So if you're ready to take some notes, write those things down, give you some good ideas on things to do there. He'll share some stories, and then I'll take a crack at it, share just a couple of things for me that really stood out, and some of you have been hinted at in the session today. And then we'll give some things away. We'll wrap up towards the end. George, you ready to go, my friend?
I am. I love that you say you're going to take a crack at it as if you're not the data king. This is what you do, man. There's no crack at it. It's just what you do. You naturally breathe and sleep data. And so what I would like for everybody to do in the thread right now, if you can just comment Data King Ben, just hashtag Data King Ben. I just want to see if we can go viral with Data King Ben, hashtag that out there today. I think it'd be great, but I'll take a crack at it. I'll let you swing for the fences a little bit later. But yes, I want to share this in just a little bit of outline to everybody on the survey that we have done. Over 1,000 global workers took this survey all the way from US to Canada, UK, India, and Australia. And it submitted over 30 plus questions. And one of the things I really love about this research, Ben, and we've always been able to do this at Lighthouse Research Advisory, is really, check in on the gender. We can do it based on age, ethnicity, and things of that nature. And so I'm excited about that. And there's more to come throughout some of these details that we're finding as you continue to, teach me the way of this. But I do want to share just a few things that really kind of stuck out with me when it comes to the performance. And I love that I'm getting rubbed off on the data. Ben's really accepting the the acronym junkie a piece. And so it's been a great time. But let's dig into some of the things that really kind of stuck out with me when it comes to performance piece. When I looked at the performance, man, some of the things that really stuck out is knowing how employees are feeling. Do they understand what they do and also why they do it? And so in this research, we found that 62% of employers said they fully understand their job responsibilities and what those performance expectations were. When I thought about this and then looking into it, understanding what the job responsibility was, it's looking at it from a couple of perspectives. I think of it as, when I first get a job, I go through an interview, I see the job role and responsibilities. That's what I'm capable of doing, what I'm supposed to do. But a lot of employees are looking more and more now for, how do I do these things? We talked about training earlier on and the consistency of ongoing development, and not just knowing what my responsibilities are, but how do I execute them? How do I perform at the highest to be able to grow, to be able to succeed? We talk about the pay transparency and how that impacts the performance as well. When people know what they're doing and where they're going and the expectations in between, that performance really is impacted by that. And so understanding their job responsibilities is not just giving a piece of paper, showing them what they are supposed to do, but truly understanding how to do what they're expected to do so that they can perform at the highest level, and not just waiting for a review, not just waiting for somebody to correct them or reprimand them for not doing their job the right way, but truly not just training, but developing them into that role to fully understand the responsibilities, to fully understand the expectations that it takes for some of those performances. Another thing that kind of stuck out with me as well is, what are the new hire desires? What are those people who are coming into the new organization? They're going through the hiring process. What are they wanting from the process? And one of the things that really stood out to me is that they want to know. They explain to me during the hiring process how things are evaluated. How's my performance going to be evaluated? 80% of employees say, I would like to know that from the hiring manager in that process. This is, again, part of the transparency. Let me know now before I'm hired, before my 90-day review. Let me understand what is expected of me in the beginning so there's clarity. I want to know that there's understanding. I clearly understand what is expected from the beginning of my job standpoint. Understanding how I react, how do I get into the workflow, what is an individual expectation for myself, and then what's also maybe a team expectation, and how I'm evaluated on that. Am I evaluated based on the performance of my individual expectation and performance? Maybe bonus and structure, commission for some jobs are coming to play as I think of it. So understanding from the beginning and the foundation of the hiring process and truly showing that transparency, right? We talked about consistency. What does that look like? What does that mean? And then we also talk about, what does that mean to the individual? George may say consistency looks one way. Ben or you may say, hey, consistency for me looks this way. And so how do we perceive the expectation? How do we perceive from the individual expectation how I'm to perform and do that job capabilities? And so being clear and understanding the new hire and clear in the expectation of that process is important as well. That person truly understands from the beginning. And so you can align that with their 90-day review. You can align that with, hey, within 3 to 4 days, this employee already knows whether or not they want to stay with your company. And so having that clear communication and expectation and understanding those things, if they understand, hey, in the first week, I know whether or not I'm going to stay with that company. Some things that I think about is, were you clear in the beginning of the expectations? Were you clear on their performance? Are they seeing inconsistencies with what was said in the hiring process and what's being evaluated in the training process? And so having that consistency and that transparency is important to new hires. They want to know during the hiring process what they're going to be evaluated on based on the performance reviews and their job expectations. One of the other things that really stood out, and this is important as well, when we ask the question, which of the following is true about your manager support and how they support you? What do you need from your manager? What's the expectation that you have? What is the expectations that your manager has for you? When we asked which of the following is true about how your manager supports your work performance, it was very clear that people really expect managers to have that hands-on support. They need that. And then there are some that says, right now I see night and day. My manager is going through the emotions. Why is my manager going through the emotions? It could be many things. How's the culture of your workplace? How is your manager's health, mental health doing? Is your manager checked out? Is your manager lifted or covered with a lid? And what I mean by that is you see that your manager, your direct leader can only do so much, can only change so much. And so they're just going through the motions. Many of us call this check the box, right? We go through, we check the box because it's our job. We check the box of what we're supposed to do. We're not going over or above. We're just kind of going through the emotions. We're there, but we're not there. We're showing up, but we're not showing up for others. And so 17% says, you know what, my manager is just going through the emotions. They're there, but they're not there. So there's not that true connection. That manager doesn't show that support that I need. Some managers are saying, you know, I try. I have a manager that tries. They show up, but they're too busy. They got other tasks and responsibilities. This person can kind of go two ways. This manager, I look at it as the employee can say, you know what, I see my manager doing so much for the business. They're helping out other people. And I don't want to be a hindrance. I don't want to be a thorn to this rose. I don't want to set my manager back. I don't want to get in the way because I know they have a lot on their plate. It could be another thing where the manager is just too busy and they're not giving their leaders and their employees enough help or support. And so understanding that value, that many employers are saying, I want that help. I want a manager that cares, that shows up, that helps supports me to perform my best. Right now, only 54% says my manager helps supports me to perform at my best. I have that accountability. I have a manager who is leading and helping and guiding me through the expectations that I have and that's been set for me to be able to perform at a higher level. Another thing that's really important to me, and this is something that I feel like is very powerful. And this piece here, I want to spend a little bit more time on here in a second. I'm going to ask you, Ben, to kind of chime in on this here in a second with this question. But when I think about culture, we talk about performance, and performance is really a factor of engagement that the employee has. The culture really is impacted then with the performance. When I think about culture in Quantum Workplace, I love how Shane said it earlier that their belief and how they look at culture is it's what we do. It's how we do what we do. When I think about culture, it's similar to that, but I break it down a little bit in three phases. How do employees feel? When you think about culture, how do employees feel? What is it that they think? What is it that they feel the company values them for? Is it for profit or is it for people? They care about people more than they care about profit. How do you feel about your company right now? Think about that for a second. When you think about culture, think about how do you feel as an individual? And then as you think about that, culture to me is how you feel. And then it's also how you believe, right? Because feeling then turns into believing. How you feel eventually becomes a mindset on how you believe. I feel this way, and because I feel this way, I start to believe that this is true. I feel my manager cares for me. I feel my manager does not care for me. I feel my manager is too busy. I feel my manager is going through the emotions. So how I feel then turns into how I believe. And then how you believe then becomes how you behave. So when I think about culture, culture to me is how your employees feel, believe, and behave most of the time. And so when we ask the question, how do you rate your overall workplace culture at your company? How do you feel? How do you believe? How do you behave within your company? Is it functional? Is it functional and supportive? Is it functional, but it's barely working out? Is it just a dysfunctional mess, right? We talked about these things earlier on, and we heard a comment that made it, and we hear it all the time, right? People don't leave bad companies, they leave bad leaders. But is that true? They're leaving culture most of the time, how people feel, believe, and behave. People want to have that sense of connection. Ben, I know that we talked about this, and I really want you to share your thoughts and your beliefs. How does performance and culture connect? Can you share just a little bit about that as we talk about culture and the impact it has on performance?
Yes, absolutely. I'm enjoying this so much, by the way, George, hearing you share the data and do it in a way that you're super comfortable with it. I love it. On the performance side, one of the things that I did years ago I worked for a company who had the most incredible culture that I'd ever worked for. And I know someone says that, like, okay, well, what does that mean, right? Did they have the beer in the fridge or the ping pong tables? They had none of those things, right? We knew what the culture was, what our values were as a company. When we hired people, we asked questions around those values because they were important to us. And on a daily basis, we knew that if we were in a situation where there was no guidance from a direct leader, they were out of town, they had got hit by the milk truck, like whatever happened, they won the lottery and were gone. If we had to make a decision, we could fall back on those core values, and we knew that we had the backing of our leadership no matter what. So one of our engineers, talking about the performance wrap in here, George, one of our engineers got a call Friday afternoon, 3:30. He was about to check out and go home for the weekend. And one of our customers said, hey, we just got this device down here you programmed for us. It worked in the office when we tested it out. Now we've got it here and put it together. It won't come on. We can't figure out what's going on with it. And so he was like, my manager's already gone for the weekend. You know, we can do this Monday first thing. They said, no, we actually need it to be working Monday morning. We have a class coming in. So he said, I'll be there in 2 hours. He put his laptop in the car, drove down there, got it fixed for them, late into the evening, Friday night, probably surviving on, Mountain Dew and pizza. We got this done for them. Monday morning when his boss came back and said, hey, I heard something happened this weekend. What was going on? And this guy, some organizations would say, you didn't get approval. What's going on with you? He said, that was our number one core value, is making sure it's on time. And you took care of them for that. Like, we're going to celebrate this. We're going to throw you a, kind of a lunch thing and to celebrate this as a team because the customer's happy. You did something above and beyond. And that was a really clear example that I started sharing and onboarding with new employees, saying, if you want to understand what this means, here's an example of someone who lived it out. And so that's why I love you talking about the feel, behave. I love the quantum piece of this, talking about how we act, how we do things around here, because the hard part about culture, saying it's a great culture, it's a terrible culture, is there's something physical happening. We have to see something happening around us, and it has to have something to attach to. And those stories like that, where I would celebrate kind of the legends in our workplace for these values we believed in, that was the real way that I try to make this tangible for all of our people when they were coming in from a performance perspective.
Yeah, so true. And it even, for me, when I think about that, this research to me is, we had domino effects, right? Everything's kind of a domino effect. Culture is really a feel, believe, behave, how we do things. And how we do things then dictates whether or not employees are really engaged. Are they having a sense of belonging? Are they connected? How are they connected? Are they connected because of other people around them, their team members? Are they connected because their managers care for them? And then when they are engaged employees' performance then becomes a higher level, right? The performance is impacted when employees are engaged. They care about their work. They know what they do, but they also know why you do it. When we talk about belonging, when we talk about the engagement piece, one of the things that I really love, and I have a strong passion, I want people to care and know that we care, right? We talk about our team. I want Ben to know that I don't care how people perceive it, but I want Ben to know that I love him. I'm not ashamed to say I love working with Ben. I love doing projects with Ben. I love the company that Ben and I are part of. But also, I love Ben. We talk about loving what we do, loving who we get to do it with, but we don't really express that. We talk about human, right? Bringing human back into human resources. And as we talk about the culture piece, one of the other things, Ben, that kind of stuck up next to me as well in this research was, and we've been talking about this for months now, is that belonging. What does that look like? When an employee who belongs within a workplace, they feel respected and accepted, right? And appreciated for the work. The psychological definition, I feel accepted for who I am, where I am, and why I am where I'm at, right? I feel respected by that, but I also feel appreciated. Employees who had that high belonging, where they felt by their direct managers that they belonged, that manager respected them, that manager accepted them, that manager appreciated them. The impact that it had blew me away in this research in particular. One of the things that really stood out with me, and I'll just point out one of these today, you can see it on your screen, but those people with high belonging scores, those workers, those employees on your team, 8 times more likely to be happy in their current position with no plans to quit. And this is important because on the opposite end, what you will see in this research study, you'll be able to check it out later, is that those people who have low belonging scores, within 6 months, their numbers was even higher, right? They're looking for a job. Some of them right now are looking for jobs. Those people who don't have a manager that accepts, respects, or appreciate them in the next 6 months are saying, I want to leave this organization because I don't have a manager, one, who has a sense of care, a sense of appreciation. Maybe they appreciate me. They're thankful because of the job and the performance that you're doing, but I don't feel like they really respect me or accept me for who I am. And I don't have that sense of belonging. This really, really stuck with me because when it comes to having a culture and a healthy culture where employees feel engaged, where they feel like I want to be a part of something more than just showing up and doing what I do. When it comes to belonging, people who have a sense of belonging, to me, say, you know what, George, I not only know what I do, but I'm here at this place because I know why I do it. When your what really collides with your why, that person is engaged. That person's performance elevates. That person wants to be a part of that organization, no matter what. Now, let's face it. Organizations are not perfect. There's no perfect organization. We are human. We'll make mistakes. We'll have some high moments as leaders. We'll have some low moments. That's the reality. But when a person understands that beyond the flaws of who we are as humanity, I know deep down inside that manager, that leader cares for me. They show up for me. They care more than just about the job, but they care about who I am after I clock out, after I step over the threshold of my workplace. They care about my well-being. They care about my work-life balance, whatever that may be for me in my job. When I think about work-life balance, I think of it more of not just work-life balance, but work-life rhythm. It's the beat of the drum. What does today look like, right? Some days are boom, 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 boom. And then some days are just real slow and steady and calm, and things are all right. My employer, my leader cares about my work-life rhythm, how my day is going. And that makes me feel like I belong. And when I belong, the company culture is impacted by that. My productivity and how satisfied I am, not just in my work, but with my work, really matters as well when I feel that appreciation within the job. This, to me, is really important. Do your employees, and more particular, I'll speak to you who are watching today. Do you feel like you belong within your workplace? Do you feel like there's a connection where you feel accepted, that you feel respected and appreciated for who you are, where you are, and for what you do with your job and with your company? That matters, because if you feel that way or you don't feel that way, you may not be the only one. So how do we then make that change? It really then becomes a thing that we have to communicate with our leaders. We have to have that transparency to be able to have that conversation that says, this is something that I feel. This is something that I believe, and this is why I'm behaving the way I'm behaving. And this really affects my performance. Having that transparent conversation with your leadership or being able to is important as well. We see in this research how that manager impact is being able to change the direction of teams and departments. And I'll say this too, because managers on the other side needs that same support. It's not just us as HER leaders and directors and managers saying, you know what, I need to do this for our employees. I understand you need that support as well. And so it goes both ways. As we're loving people that are with our team on the front line, we also have to have that same transparency and support above, because as often as we might like to say, we're only human. I think that's a statement in a podcast that Ben has. We're only human. We can only do so much as leaders. And if we're going to lead the life we love, if we're going to lead a life where we're impacting others, we must first also have that leadership done for us as well. One of the things that I want to share, and this is a story about a company that I've been able to be a part of, really hands-on, and see the impact, and really made this impact just a few years ago. Back in 2018, I was working. I had 18 retail stores. We were a phone repair store in Indiana and Michigan. And one of the things I did is we would visit our carriers, Verizon and AT&T stores, and really try to get them to send their customers to us to fix their devices. It was a partnership without being a partnership. And one day I came across a good friend of mine's book. It was there. I hadn't talked to him in years. And he wrote a book called Build a Culture of Good. And it was a Verizon TCC store. And at the time, TCC Wireless Zone was one of the largest, the #1 third-party Verizon store. 10 years ago, Verizon TCC, Scott Moorhead, the CEO, the founder, said, you know what, I want to really take more than just donating money to organizations and nonprofits. I really want our employees to understand what we're doing behind the scenes. Employees had no connection with the profit, the charity program that was going on in a sense. And so then Ryan and Scott came together and said, how do we connect this? How do we get our employees engaged with what we're doing, but also why we're doing it? We're not just doing it to keep people's mobile lives together, but why we are truly doing this is to make a greater good within our community. Right? We have community, we have our clients. And so what TCC did is that they began to do what they now call their Big Good event, TCC Cares, and was created with Culture of Good. Culture of Good says, you know, what if we gave back to our community? And what way could we do that? They figured out, hey, let's give backpacks. Every July, this is a cause, this is a need within our communities all around in the 43 plus states that we have locations at. And so every year, in July and August, they pick out a week that they're going to do a giveaway of book bags. This impact and this small gesture of employees taking their time out 1 week and really giving back to their community really changed the dynamic of Verizon TCC 10 years ago. Still to this day, over 600,000 plus book bags have been given away. Almost over 1 million book bags total have been given away over the course of the 10 years, and it continues to grow. And the impact of this internally really challenged me as an individual. It challenged me to do more and want to do more, but it also challenged the C-suite levels and the leaders and directors there. What happened is that after the first event, that TCC gave their book bag giveaways, employees a year later said, you know what, I want to do more. There was excitement. People were excited about this. And so they built out 3 tiers. The Big Good was a backpack giveaway. And then they say, well, how can we really get this consistency going? The engagement, the employees from all over, multiple locations, multiple states, they're loving this. They're talking about it. How do we get this consistency going? Monthly, weekly, that is part of who we are, and it's why we do what we do. And so they started a thing called Our Good, where each department would get together and then they would do Our Good. What's something that we as a group are passionate about doing that we can do together? And so, for instance, we're all part of the marketing team. So we as a group here live today, we're part of a marketing team. We'll get together and we'll say, you know what, we all have animals. We all love animals. Let's do something and give back our time. So instead of just giving a check to an animal shelter, we'll not only give that check, but we're going to show up. We're going to be hands-on, a part of their event to do good in the community as well. And then from there, it grew even more. It says, you know what, how can George, how can you as an individual, Sarah, listen, how can you out there do good and continue to do good? And so the third tier became My Good. And so we have the Big Good backpack giveaway, we had Our Good, the department connection where we do good together. And then My Good is that my company, TCC, gives PTO that says, George, go out and do good in the community over the course of the year. Report what you're doing. Make sure we keep it aligned because we want to make sure that your why is connected to what you're doing. What this did is that it changed the dynamic of retention. 83% of the employees that stay with the company says culture good, and this backpack giveaway, doing good, was the reason why they stay. Over 92% of those same employees through outside research that came in say, you know what, 92% says, you know what, culture good and this doing good gave me a sense not of just engagement, but fulfillment. And so when I think about how culture impacts engagement, when you talk about how can you change the culture of your organization, connect what you do with why you do it. When employees understand why they do something, that there's a greater cause, there's a greater purpose, it becomes more than just engagement, it becomes fulfillment. They feel fulfilled. They want to be a part of something more than just what they do, but why they do it. Understanding that the company and the organization is not profit driven by people, but people driven, and then the profit. And so that really impacted me. And I wanted to share this case study with you today because I believe this is just a prime example of what happens now. Is the organization the best of the best? Is there flaws? There's mistakes? Sure. Like I said before, we're all human. There's going to be those human nature struggles that we all deal with. Life happens. But what it done internally in regards to the culture and the engagement and the performance of the departments, the performance of each location was a change that now this become a movement. It's 10 years in the making, and it does nothing but grow more and more and more as we discuss these things. Even more so. Ben, I'm gonna bring you up, but I want to also share some of these key takeaways that I have with this study. Some of the things that really stuck out with me, Ben, is understanding the employees, the technology piece. And we didn't share a lot about this, and you'll see some of it. And I'll be sharing a lot. I'll have some snippets over the course of the next month or two, because as I'm digging into this, I'm finding new things. As you're talking to me, I'm hearing new things, and I'm excited about going in. But one of the things that I did see is how technology has really impacted employees. The companies that had technology, they were using technology as part of their work, how they do things and doing what they do. They said that it really added value. It impacted their performance. It helped affect their performance in a higher way. It helped them understand what to do, and it helped them be efficient in what they do. Another thing that really stood out with me, and I always say this as a leader, is that before I talk to an employee, especially we talked about the sandwich, right? Say a good thing, talk about the negative, close it with something good. Always a challenge myself and then my leaders on my team is to always inspect what you expect. So before I talk to an employee about something, I need to inspect what they're doing and try to figure out why they're doing that way. Do I understand why they're doing it? Was I clear? We talked about the earlier topic of performance and expectations during the hiring process, that transparency, not just with pay, but what are you expecting from me? What are you expecting from me from the responsibility standpoint? What are you expecting from me from the performance standpoint? We as leaders, and then also employees, we got to inspect what we expect, not just from a leadership standpoint, but even an employee. What am I expecting from my organization? And how that really leads to engaged employees. When we have engaged leaders, when leaders care, they're engaged and having that conversation. How employees want to have reviews. What does that look like? Some are weekly, some are monthly, some are quarterly. That's their language. How do we do those and perform those? And then the last thing that really stuck out with me, Ben, and I'm interested after this to hear some of your key takeaways and things that you saw, but really having to understand and really knowing what we do as employees and really why we do it. A lot of employees want to have that why, that sense of, hey, if you want me to be engaged, I understand what I'm doing, but why am I doing this? Explain that more than enough feeling to me. And so having those three connections, the technology piece, as you'll see as you dig into this research, is important. Engage leaders, stay engaged. It doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect every day. It doesn't mean that you're going to shake hands and kiss babies every morning and know everything about her. It's just being consistent, right? Having that consistency and showing up, not just for others, but showing up also for yourself. Ben, what were some of the things that really kind of stuck out for you? I think you're muted. Are you muted?
Yep, hit my mute button. All right, I'm good.
Right with you.
Oh, goodness.
It's every episode, every moment.
There we go. You got to find it somewhere. I enjoyed that so much, George, hearing you share, hearing you bring some of the stats to life and really telling some of the stories. TCC stories is an awesome one. I love you sharing those things and really, as the audience saying, like your passion's showing, it's coming out, and I love you getting fired up about this. So this is so incredible. I'm going to share just a couple of stats really quick with everybody because I know you're about statted out probably, honestly, but I'll give you some big picture things, a couple of practical takeaways, another story of a company that I really respect highly, their leadership, what they're doing, and then we'll give some things away and wrap it up for the day. I know you're probably your brains are about full, so I've enjoyed this so much. All right, let me share mine really quick and see. There we go. Okay, so we heard this earlier in the session with Shane, where he referenced this stat, but I want you to see this. So if you actually look at the actual data over here, look, so when we ask an employee, hey, are you planning to leave? You planning to stay? What are your plans here? If they tell us that a manager is just going through the motions, they're phoning it in, they're completely checked out or checking the box, or, hey, manager's really trying, they're doing their best, but they're just busy. Like they understand, they're giving them, right? They give them the benefit of the doubt there. You see here, fundamentally, it doesn't change their intent to quit their job though. Even if you're like, hey, I get it, it's hard, but I still am going to quit. They don't give that manager any more grace. There was a time after the pandemic, everything else, where they gave them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of, wiggle room there to say, hey, I know you're trying. I'll give you some time. That time is now over. So we're talking about all these things today. And again, we don't want to stress you out too much, but you do need to see the urgency in this, that we have to solve for it. or there's going to be some big challenges. Not only that, but just to tie in one last thing here, one of the questions that George put in the survey I thought was really incredible was he asked about, as an employee, do you have the support you need? Do you have the resources you need? Do you have both, or do you have neither? So we got a really granular and specific question in there. One of the things that stood out to me is we asked them questions around, hey, do you have the resources? Do you have the tools you need? Even when they said, yes, I have that, but if they didn't have the support, it created problems. It created gaps in there. So they need both of those things to happen. And today we've heard from some incredible companies, Josh, Sarah, Shane, all work at organizations that are bringing technologies and tools. And even every single one of them, if you asked them one-on-one, they would say, hey, this can't just be done, turn it on, and it's all good. It has to be aligned with your position as a leader. It has to be aligned with your culture as a company, with your philosophy on pay, as Sarah was talking about. All those things have to come together. We have to do that not in some vacuum, but they have to tie together. All right, so no more data. I'm going to give you a couple of quick takeaways, quick ideas for you, and then we'll wrap this up. Just some things you're like, okay, this has been so great, but what do I do next? Here's some things to think about. Number one, you probably have some managers in your organization. You heard George reference this a minute ago. We've all been taught this feedback sandwich. Tell something good, tell them their critical feedback, give them the thing to fix, and then give them something good to close it up with. Make them feel good when they walk away. The problem is that's not always clear. They may walk away thinking, I think I'm okay, but I may not be, but there was more good than bad, so maybe I'm all right. And they may not actually make the change you want them to make. So instead of doing that, do this. There was a research study done several years ago where they took a bunch of students that had taken a test and they came back to them with two different kinds of feedback. The first group said, this is feedback on your grade. Just gave them a score. Here's your feedback. The second group, they said, we know you can do a great job. We have high expectations of you. Here's your grade, but we know you can do better. That's it, right? They gave them the expectations. We have high expectations for you, and the assurance. We know you can do better. And they gave both of those groups a chance to redo their work and turn it back in. Well, you might not surprise you here, but the second group was much more likely to redo the work and score more highly on the redo than that first group did. They just said, here's some feedback for you. Take it or leave it. Because the second group said, we know you can do better. George, I have high expectations for you. I know you can be great. And I know I can't wait to see that from you. Here, give it another shot. And that second group was more likely to do it. So expectations and assurance in there, that combination is better than the feedback sandwich where it's like, hey, you're so wonderful. You need to fix this. You're not doing it great, but you are wonderful, because that sends mixed messages. And to be unclear is to be unkind. We're creating a harder environment for people to actually perform. And that's probably where you get some of those answers from the employees in the survey where like the way we manage performance makes it harder for me to do my job, honestly. So let's not do that. Let's get them on the clear path to success. We heard from George about belonging and that important piece of that. The research actually from Google, they did some incredible research on this, and they found that when teams perform at their very best, the indicator that they could find tied back to every single team that was high performing, they kept looking at all these different things. What tools do we give them? The resources, the managers, like the thing that kept coming back over and over as a theme was psychological safety. These workers were in a team where they could raise their hand and they could ask a question or they could push back on an idea. And it wasn't like they were going to get beat up or they were going to be mistreated. They knew that they were in a safe space because they were all working towards the same common goal. The conversations around knowing the why in our work have come out today over and over again. And that's another vote for that. And last but not least here, I'll close with this and then we'll wrap it up. This is Dana Olenvuselich. Had a chance to meet her a couple years ago. She is brilliant, so smart. She's an HR leader for a company called Ohio Living. And so they do elder care communities and things like that. And one of the things they tried to do a few years ago is they said, we really just want to put a recognition program in place. We want to make sure our employees feel like the work they're doing is noticed and appreciated. You heard from George how important that is in the data. And so they started doing this. They started just letting people recognize others. And they thought, okay, we're good. And someone on the team that was a little bit of a data nerd said, hey, I wonder is there's anything else happening here? So they started looking at it and they found something really incredible. When they started looking at where those teams were, where the departments were a lot of feedback and recognition were being given. Hey, great job. You served this patient well. You took care of this issue. When those sorts of feedback were being given on a consistent basis, those areas of the business had fewer patient fall risks, fewer patient reinfection rates, fewer issues with having to revisit for additional care or additional services. So it was actually impacting the bottom line of the organization because, as Dana would tell you, the way this company gets funded primarily is through scores from government surveys and things. And so if they're having to a lot of resubmissions and reapplications and redos, essentially, it's impacting their revenue as an organization. So we're talking about all these things today, but if you're like, I want to get my leaders bought into this, there's an example for you that really ties this together. It's not just about, let's all give each other high fives, let's hand out a bunch of backpacks, to George's example. There are so many more things that tie together in this than that, and it impacts how people perform and how the company performs at the end of the day. All those things are tied together. Okay, so some of you have said, hey, where's all this research at? Can I find it? Is this published? So I'll make sure and get we were posted it once, but I'll make sure it's posted again. We have an infographic out. We're working on, there's a report coming out very soon with the team at Quantum Workplace. We have some other things come along very soon with some of the other companies that have been here with us today. We have other infographics that George and I are working on sharing out. So those things will be coming out very soon. If you want to be notified when those things happen, we publish all of our research completely for free. I've been an HR leader, a practitioner, and my budget for this kind of stuff was $0. And so we give this stuff away as a way to help you elevate your game, help you be more supportive of your people. We're going to be sharing all these things out very soon. So stay tuned on that. And last but not least, we have some giveaways, some good things. So George and I love giving stuff away. It's probably our favorite thing to do. And so if you see here over my shoulder, I have my latest book, George's brand new book that just came out earlier this year. Both of those, we're going to give those away. So if your name's on this list, grab a screenshot of this, send it to us, let us know, and we'll make sure and get those sent out probably over the next week or so. We'll send them out in a big batch. So ping us, let us know. Thank you for all of you who chimed in, who shared your thoughts, who played a part in the session today, because I appreciate it. I know George does too. To our amazing supporters and sponsors for coming alongside us to bring this to you and to help elevate the HR professional, bring some new research, bring some new ideas, helping all of you to think through this more clearly. I appreciate all of them very, very much for making sure this is possible. George, any closing thoughts? We got a minute or two. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, as I stated before in the beginning, I want people to be inspired. There's a lot of great things that are moving forward. There's a lot of great things that we see with managers and the impact they're having on employees, but also the employees voicing their desires for more things. But also challenge yourself. What is it that I can do where I'm at in the position that I'm at to really help people feel that sense of belonging, to help people understand why you do what you do, as Quantum Workplace would say when it comes to culture, it's what we do. Helping people understand those things, and then really try to drive. The two words today is transparency and consistency. How can you be a part of that and really drive the be consistent at being transparent? Right. And so be encouraged by that, but also challenge yourself, challenge others. Hey, this is what we want to do. If we really want to strive to make people feel like they belong and that it's not just something that we're doing for the sake of, but it's truly who we are really fostering that sense of engagement. We're fostering, embodying that sense of community and unity, communicating those things. It's important to really live it. And not it be a value thing on the wall, but it's living those things. We live those things daily. We live with showing our people that they are respected, accepted, and appreciated. We live by giving them that sense and fostering that lifestyle. And so, as always, this is the time of the sessions that I really struggle with, man. I just want to keep on talking so that we can stay together, but I know that every good thing at some point must come to an end. I'm honored. I want to be grateful for our sponsors and those who've been working behind the scenes with us for this session as well. Thank those sponsors. And then, as always, Ben, I love you, my friend. Thank you for letting me be a part of this piece and let me have an acronym.
Yes,
as well.
I had to give the acronym right off the bat, or I knew you would never never fully commit to it. So the acronym was where it was all at. Thank you again to you, George, for this session. You did an amazing job on the research. Appreciate you for sharing that. To Shane, to Sarah, to Josh, thank y'all for spending some time with us, for sharing your thoughts with us, for giving us some food for thought, and to all of you who chimed in today as well. We'll be sending out details on the HRCI and SHRM credits in the next 24 hours or so. We'll be collecting some other good ideas from this. We had so many shared in the sessions. Thank you to all of you, and we'll see you again on our next live stream.